Yuma Proving Ground, Arizona, early 2002. A tracked vehicle sits alone on a firing pad in the desert. It is low, wide, and painted the flat sand color of a machine that expects to be photographed. The barrel is wrapped along its entire length in a steel jacket. Inside that jacket, a pump is circulating coolant around the tube, like the radiator of a truck. There is no loading crew standing beside it. There are no men in the open handling shells. There are 3 soldiers inside the hull, sitting in padded seats in front of screens. One of them is about to fire 8 rounds at 8 different angles. Every one of those rounds will land on the same point at the same instant. By this point, the gun on that pad has fired more than 4,000 rounds in testing. In 4 months, it will be dead. It is too heavy. It is too expensive. It is built, the critics say, for a war that ended 11 years ago. It weighs 40 tons. Paired with its ammunition vehicle, it becomes a 100-ton problem for an air force that wants brigades on the other side of the world in 96 hours. It has been in development, under one name or another, since the Soviet Union still existed. It has cost $11 billion, and it is the most visible symbol of an army that its own civilian leadership believes is preparing for the wrong century. Every one of those criticisms was true, and this gun could put 10 rounds a minute onto a target 40 kilometers away. It could sustain fire long after a conventional barrel would have been too hot to load. It could be rearmed with 48 shells and refueled in under 12 minutes. A second vehicle docked with it and moved the ammunition across automatically without a single soldier stepping outside. It ran on a gas turbine engine the Army also planned to put into the Abrams. It was, by a wide margin, the most capable self-propelled howitzer any nation had ever built. 20 years later, Russia invaded Ukraine. The war that followed was decided by artillery. Western howitzers sent to fight it wore out their barrels faster than American industry could replace them, and the United States Army spent those 2 decades trying 3 separate times to build a replacement for the gun it had canceled. It failed all 3 times. This is the XM2001 Crusader. Whether killing it was the smartest decision the Pentagon made that decade, or the most expensive mistake in modern American artillery, has never actually been settled. To understand why the Crusader existed, you have to go back to what the United States Army was afraid of in the 1980s. The fear was Soviet artillery, not Soviet tanks. Artillery. Soviet doctrine treated guns as the primary killer on the battlefield and built them in quantities the West could not match. American planners, looking at the Fulda Gap, did the arithmetic and did not like the answer. The gun the Army would have to fight that battle with was the M109, a self-propelled howitzer that had entered service in 1963. It was reliable, and it was everywhere. It was also a design older than most of the men crewing it. It had been upgraded so many times that each new version bought smaller improvements at greater cost. So the Army started work on something new. The program was called the Advanced Field Artillery System, and it lived inside a larger effort called Armored Systems Modernization. Then, the Cold War ended. Armored Systems Modernization was canceled in October of 1992, and most of what it contained died with it. The artillery program survived. In 1994, it was renamed. It became Crusader. United Defense would build it, with General Dynamics as the major subcontractor. The first design was a genuine monster. It weighed around 60 tons, and it used a liquid propellant system meant to replace conventional powder bags entirely. The liquid propellant did not work well enough. It was abandoned in 1996 in favor of solid charges. The weight came down over the following years to somewhere between 38 and 41 tons. That mattered for one reason. A C5 or a C-17 could now carry 2 of them instead of 1. The first prototype howitzer was delivered in the second quarter of fiscal year 2000. What that prototype could do is the part worth slowing down for. Start with the barrel. Every artillery piece in the world has the same fundamental limit. Firing heats the tube, and a hot tube is a dangerous tube. Fire fast enough for long enough, and the barrel wears. The accuracy drifts, and eventually the gun has to stop and cool down. That pause is not a technicality. In a counter-battery duel, the gun that has to stop is the gun that dies. The Crusader's cannon was designated the XM297E2. It carried a cooling jacket running the full length of the tube, circulating isopropyl glycol around the barrel while the gun fired. It was, in the most literal sense, a liquid-cooled artillery piece. That one decision unlocked everything else. A barrel that sheds heat is a barrel that can keep firing. Then the loading. On an M109, shells are handled by human beings. Somebody lifts a 100-pound 30-pound projectile, somebody rams it, somebody sets the charge. Crew fatigue is a real ceiling on how long a gun can fight. The Crusader carried its projectiles in 2 magazines fed by closed-loop conveyors. The entire loading cycle was automated. The crew was 3, a chief of section, a gunner, and a driver, all of them inside the hull, none of them lifting anything. That combination produced the number that made artillery officers pay attention. 10 rounds per minute for 3 minutes, then a sustained rate of between 3 and 6 rounds a minute for as long as the ammunition held out. No pause to cool, no crew burning out. Now, before we get to the trick, this gun could do that nothing else in the world could. If you're enjoying this deep dive into American military engineering, hit subscribe. It takes a second, and it helps the channel grow. Multiple round simultaneous impact. A shell fired at a low angle travels a flat, fast path. A shell fired at a high angle arcs up and takes longer to arrive. Know the ballistics precisely enough and change the charge and the elevation fast enough between rounds, and you can fire a sequence of shells on different paths that all arrive at the same place at the same moment. The Crusader could do this with up to 8 rounds. It worked at ranges between 5 and 30 kilometers. Think about what that means from the receiving end. There is no first shell, no warning round, no interval in which a soldier hears the incoming and gets under cover. One gun produces the effect of an entire battery firing at once, then drives away before anything can be fired back. Feeding it was its own engineering problem, and the answer was a second vehicle. The XM2002 resupply vehicle came in tracked and wheeled versions, and it did not simply park nearby while men formed a chain. It docked with the howitzer. It transferred up to 48 rounds of ammunition and fuel across automatically in under 12 minutes, with both crews staying inside. The 2 vehicles together were the system. That is also exactly what killed it. On the 8th of May, 2002, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld announced that the Crusader program would be terminated. His reasoning was not that the gun failed. It was that the gun succeeded at the wrong thing. His position, argued publicly and consistently, was that Crusader was neither mobile enough nor precise enough for the wars America was actually going to fight. American troops were in Afghanistan. The strategic problem of the moment was moving force quickly to places with no ports and no roads. In that framing, a 40-ton howitzer that needed a 36-ton partner vehicle to function was a Cold War artifact. It had survived the Cold War by institutional inertia and nothing else. There was a more precise version of the objection. Together, the howitzer and its resupply vehicle came to roughly 100 tons. Getting that pair into a C-5 Galaxy required flight rules to be waived. An artillery system that needs an exception written for it before it can be flown anywhere is not strategically mobile. Whatever else it is, the Army fought back. And then the Army made a serious mistake. Someone inside the Office of Legislative Liaison produced a set of talking points for Congress arguing that canceling Crusader would dramatically reduce Army readiness and result in lost lives on the battlefield. The document went out. It was an attempt by a uniformed service to lobby the legislature against its own civilian leadership, and it did it by implying the Secretary of Defense was going to get soldiers killed. Rumsfeld was reportedly furious. The Army Inspector General opened an investigation. Kenneth Stedman, the principal deputy in that office, resigned that Friday. Army Secretary Thomas White had been one of the Crusaders' strongest advocates. He denied any involvement. He called the talking points offensive and insulting. Repugnant, he said, and contrary to the interests of our troops and country. The program was formally terminated on the 9th of May. $310 million of its funding was redirected into the Future Combat Systems program. The Army had planned to buy roughly 480 guns. It bought none. Here is where an honest accounting has to concede something, because Rumsfeld's case was not stupid and it was not made in bad faith. Crusader was heavy, its transport problem was real, and the Army's own answer to it was a waiver rather than a solution. It was expensive at a moment when the department was trying to fund a real shift in how the American military deployed, and the central claim held. America was about to spend a decade fighting insurgents in Iraq and Afghanistan, not trading barrages with a peer army in Europe. For 20 years, that was exactly right. Anyone calling Rumsfeld simply wrong is arguing with the benefit of a war nobody predicted. What is harder to defend is what happened next. The Crusader's technology did not vanish. Its autoloader was carried directly into the XM2003, the non-line-of-sight cannon built for future combat systems. 8 prototypes reached Yuma by 2009. Then Secretary of Defense Robert Gates recommended terminating the manned ground vehicle program in April of that year. In December, Ashton Carter directed the Army to cancel the cannon specifically. That was attempt number 2. The effort then folded back into upgrading the gun Crusader had been designed to replace. The Paladin Integrated Management Program produced the M109A7. It is a genuinely improved vehicle. It is also at its foundation a 1963 design. Attempt number 3 was Extended Range Cannon Artillery, launched in 2018. It put a 58 caliber barrel on a Paladin chassis, and it was designated the M1299. In December of 2020, at Yuma, a prototype hit a target 70 kilometers away. That is an extraordinary number, and it made headlines. It also wore out its barrel. Testing showed excessive wear after a relatively low number of rounds. Prototyping was halted in the fall of 2023. In March of 2024, the Army Acquisition Chief, Doug Bush, confirmed the program would not go into production. 20 prototypes had been built. The Army then set aside $55 million in fiscal year 2025 to go and look at what other countries were already selling. Barrel wear, the exact problem that a full-length cooling jacket circulating isopropyl glycol had been designed to solve 22 years earlier. And by then the evidence was no longer theoretical. In Ukraine, Western howitzers were firing at rates their designers had never planned for. They were breaking. American M777s wore out barrels faster than the United States could manufacture replacements. European Command stood up a repair facility in Poland to keep Allied guns in the fight. The most valuable quality an artillery piece could have turned out to be the ability to fire hard for a long time without destroying itself. Meanwhile, the systems that did get built elsewhere were the ones fighting. Germany's Panzerhaubitze 2000, South Korea's K9, France's Caesar, Sweden's Archer, every one of them a design contemporary with Crusader, and every one of them in service, while America's answer sat in a park. One Crusader prototype survives. It is on display at the Cannon Park at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. That is the home of American Field Artillery, a few hundred yards from the schoolhouse where the officers who would have crewed it are trained. It has fired more rounds than most guns in the American inventory. It has never fired one in anger. It never will. Yuma Proving Ground, Arizona, early 2002. A gun sits on a firing pad in the desert. Coolant circulates around its barrel. 3 soldiers sit inside the hull, and nobody is lifting a shell. It was too heavy. It was too expensive. It was built for a war that had ended 11 years earlier, against an enemy that no longer existed. Every criticism made of it in May of 2002 was accurate, and the man who made those criticisms was right about the decade that followed. And yet, in the desert, at Yuma, on a test pad in early 2002, an American gun could fire 8 shells onto one point in the same instant, sustain a rate of fire that would have cooked any other barrel in the world, rearm itself in 12 minutes without a man stepping outside, and do all of it with a crew of 3. Then it was canceled. The Army tried twice more and failed twice more. It is today still fighting with a gun designed in 1963, while it shops abroad for something better. And the Pentagon did not cancel the Crusader because it did not work. It canceled it because it worked at the wrong problem. That was a defensible judgment in 2002. It just turned out that the wrong problem was the one that came back.